There is a particular kind of exhaustion that descends not from effort, but from hoping. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He observed that hope, when unconsciously wielded, becomes a psychic orientation that binds the personality to outcomes it cannot control. The empath suffers most acutely from this binding because the capacity for feeling becomes mistaken for a moral obligation to repair, to stay, to believe in transformation that may never come. Jung warned that when the psyche invests libido in objects or relationships that cannot reciprocate or sustain that energy, a dangerous depletion occurs. The personality begins to hollow. What appears as compassion on the surface is often, underneath, a refusal to see what is actually present. Hope is not neutral. It is a stance toward reality that filters perception. When someone returns again and again to a relationship or situation expecting change, they are not simply being patient. They are enacting an unconscious fantasy that their presence, their care, their endurance will eventually alchemize the other person into someone capable of meeting them. Carl Jung called this projection. The empath projects onto the other a potential self, a version that does not yet exist and may never exist, and then relates to that phantom rather than to the person standing before them. This is not love. It is a form of psychic investment that drains the investor while enriching no one. The empath who hopes is caught in a closed circuit. Energy flows outward constantly, toward the other, toward the possibility, toward the next conversation that might finally shift things. But nothing returns. Jung described libido as psychic energy that must circulate to sustain vitality. When it flows only in one direction, the personality becomes anemic. The individual begins to experience fatigue that no amount of rest resolves. They feel heavy, their thoughts slow. Small tasks become burdensome. This is not weakness. This is the psyche signaling that something is fundamentally wrong in the distribution of energy. According to Jung, symptoms are the language of the unconscious. When the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge an imbalance, the unconscious produces a corrective. Burnout is one such correction. Emotional numbness is another. These states are not failures of character. They are protective mechanisms, ways the psyche withdraws energy from a system that has become parasitic. The empath who reaches this point often experiences guilt. They believe they are abandoning their values, betraying their nature, but what is actually happening is that the unconscious has begun the work of individuation by severing an attachment that was never reciprocal. Jung observed that the empathic type, those individuals whose primary function is feeling and whose orientation is toward others, are particularly vulnerable to self-erasure. They mistake their capacity to sense and absorb the emotional states of others for a responsibility to manage those states. This confusion leads to a life organized around others' needs, others' pain, others' potential. The empath becomes a container for what others refuse to hold. Over time, the boundaries that distinguish self from other dissolve. The empath no longer knows where their own feelings end and another's begin. They have given so much room to others that they themselves have no room left. This condition cannot sustain indefinitely. Jung was clear that the psyche will not tolerate permanent imbalance. If the conscious mind will not correct the situation, the unconscious will force the correction through symptoms, through collapse, through what appears to the outside world as sudden withdrawal or inexplicable coldness. But these are not pathologies. They are the psyche restoring itself, pulling back energy that was being squandered, redirecting libido inward so that it can nourish the self rather than the other. Detachment, when it finally arrives, does not feel like a choice. It feels like waking from a long dream and realizing the room you are in is not the room you thought it was. The empath who detaches does not decide to stop caring. They simply notice one morning that the care is no longer there. The hope has evaporated. Where there was once an active, striving orientation toward the other, there is now only quiet. This quiet is not bitterness, though it is often mistaken for it. It is the natural result of libido withdrawing from an object that cannot sustain it. Jung called this a withdrawal of projection. The phantom self the empath had been relating to dissolves, and what remains is the actual person standing there, exactly as they have always been. This moment is both devastating and clarifying. Devastating because it means acknowledging that the years of investment, the countless acts of patience and understanding, were based on a misperception. Clarifying because for the first time, the empath sees reality without the distortion of hope. They see that the other person is not going to change. They see that the relationship has been extractive. They see that their energy has been feeding something that gives nothing back. And with this seeing comes a profound shift. The empath stops leaning forward. They stand upright. They occupy their own center again. Carl Jung said that individuation begins not with connection but with separation. The person must withdraw from collective identifications, from roles and expectations imposed by others, from the unconscious entanglements that keep them tethered to relationships and dynamics that do not serve their wholeness. For the empath, this withdrawal is terrifying because it feels like betrayal. The identity they have built, the one that says I am good because I care, I am valuable because I help, I am worthy because I stay, begins to crumble. Without this identity, who are they? This is the question the psyche forces them to answer, and the answer cannot be found in relation to others. It can only be found by turning inward, by sitting with the silence, by allowing the energy that once flowed outward to pool and settle within. Jung described this as the descent into the unconscious, the encounter with what has been neglected or denied. For the empath, what has been neglected is often their own needs, their own desires, their own pain. They have been so busy attending to others that they have not attended to themselves. Now, in the stillness that follows detachment, they are forced to confront what they have ignored. This confrontation is uncomfortable. The empath, who has always defined themselves through their capacity to feel for others, now feels very little. They notice the absence of the usual sympathy when someone tells them a sad story. They notice they are no longer moved by appeals that once would have pulled them in. They notice they can say no without agonizing over it. This change is not hardness, it is discernment. The psyche is learning to protect its energy, to reserve it for what truly matters rather than dispersing it indiscriminately. Jung warned that the empathic individual often confuses love with self-sacrifice. They believe that to love someone means to endure anything, to forgive endlessly, to hope perpetually. But this is not love. It is a distortion of love, one that serves the unconscious needs of the empath more than it serves the relationship. By staying in situations that deplete them, by hoping for change that never comes, the empath avoids facing their own inner work. They remain focused on the other, on fixing the other, so they do not have to turn and face the parts of themselves that are unintegrated, the shadow material they have not yet acknowledged. According to Jung, the shadow contains everything the conscious personality has rejected or repressed. For the empath, the shadow often holds aggression, selfishness, the capacity to hurt or abandon others. These qualities terrify the empath because they contradict the identity they have built. But Jung was clear that without integrating the shadow, individuation is impossible. The person remains one-sided, capable of only half the range of human experience. The empath, who has lived entirely in the light of care and compassion, must descend into the shadow and retrieve the strength, the anger, the clarity that resides there. This descent does not feel noble. It feels dark and confusing. The empath begins to notice thoughts they have never allowed themselves before. They think about how much they have given and how little they have received. They feel resentment toward people they once loved unconditionally. They recognize the ways they have been used, the ways their kindness was taken for granted. These realizations are bitter, but they are also true. And truth, even when it is painful, is always more nourishing than illusion. Jung observed that the psyche moves toward wholeness, not toward comfort. The process of individuation is not about becoming a better version of the self as defined by external standards. It is about becoming a complete self, one that includes both light and shadow, both strength and vulnerability, both connection and solitude. For the empath, this means accepting that their capacity for care does not obligate them to care for everyone. It means understanding that withdrawal is sometimes the most honest response. It means recognizing that some relationships are not meant to be repaired, not because the people involved are bad, but because the dynamic itself is fundamentally unbalanced. The return of the empath, when it happens, is not a return to who they were. Carl Jung understood that transformation is irreversible. Once the psyche has undergone a shift, once energy has been withdrawn and redirected, the person cannot go back to the old patterns. The empath who returns after detachment returns with boundaries. They return with clarity. They return not out of hope, but out of choice, and the difference is everything. This new empath does not pour themselves into relationships indiscriminately. They do not mistake intensity for intimacy. They do not confuse their capacity to feel with an obligation to fix. They have learned, through the painful process of withdrawal, that their energy is finite and precious. They have learned that not everyone deserves access to it. They have learned that silence is sometimes more honest than speaking, that leaving is sometimes more loving than staying, that detachment is sometimes the only way to preserve the self. Jung said that the individuated person stands alone, not out of isolation, but out of self-possession. They are no longer dependent on others for their sense of worth. They no longer need external validation to feel whole. The empath who has detached and returned has achieved a degree of this self-possession. They have withdrawn their projections. They have integrated enough of their shadow to no longer fear their own strength. They have reclaimed the energy they once gave away so freely, and now they hold it carefully, offering it only where it can be received and reciprocated. This does not mean the empath becomes cold or uncaring. It means they become discerning. They care deeply but selectively. They give generously but not recklessly. They love fully but not blindly. According to Jung, this is psychological maturity. It is the capacity to relate to others without losing oneself, to remain open without becoming porous, to be compassionate without being consumed. The process of reaching this state is not linear. There are setbacks, there are moments when the old patterns resurface, when the empath feels the pull to return to relationships or dynamics that depleted them. But each time this happens, the psyche responds more quickly. The withdrawal of energy becomes more decisive. The boundaries become firmer. Over time, the empath learns to trust their instinct for self-preservation. They learn that when they feel that particular kind of exhaustion, the one that comes not from effort but from hoping, it is a signal to step back, to redirect energy inward, to allow detachment to do its work. Carl Jung warned that hope can become a moral trap. When someone believes they should hope, that it is virtuous or kind to continue believing in someone's potential, they are not acting from consciousness. They are acting from an unconscious complex, a pattern that compels them to stay even when staying harms them. The empath who breaks this pattern, who allows hope to dissolve and detachment to take its place, is not giving up. They are waking up. They are seeing clearly for the first time. This clarity is not cruel. It is precise. The empath who has detached does not hate the people they have withdrawn from. They simply see them accurately. They see the limitations, the refusals, the patterns that will not change. And seeing this, they stop fighting reality. They stop trying to make something be other than it is. They accept what is, and in that acceptance, they find freedom. Jung observed that acceptance is the foundation of transformation. But acceptance does not mean resignation. It means acknowledging reality without the distortion of fantasy or projection. For the empath, this means accepting that they cannot save everyone, that their care cannot heal everyone, that some people will remain exactly as they are no matter how much energy is poured into them. This acceptance is painful at first. It feels like failure. But as the empath sits with it, as they allow the grief to move through them, they begin to experience something unexpected. They begin to feel lighter. The burden they have been carrying, the one they thought was theirs to carry, dissolves. It was never theirs. According to Jung, much of what we believe to be our responsibility is actually a projection of collective or familial patterns onto our individual psyche. The empath who feels obligated to fix, to save, to hope endlessly is often carrying a burden that was placed on them early, perhaps by a parent who could not regulate their own emotions, perhaps by a family system that required someone to be the container for everyone's pain. The child learns to survive by becoming that container, and the pattern persists into adulthood, long after it serves any useful purpose. Breaking this pattern requires consciousness. It requires the empath to recognize that what feels like their nature, their essence, is actually a learned response to an environment that demanded it. Jung called this the process of differentiating the ego from the unconscious. The empath must ask themselves, is this truly who I am, or is this who I learned to be in order to survive? The answer is almost always the latter. And with this realization comes the possibility of change. Detachment is the mechanism of that change. It is the psyche's way of creating space between the old pattern and the new possibility. In that space, the empath can begin to experiment with new ways of being. They can practice saying no. They can practice letting others sit with their own discomfort. They can practice not intervening, not explaining, not soothing. At first, this feels wrong. The old guilt rises up, insisting that they are being selfish, that they are failing. But if they can tolerate the guilt without acting on it, if they can sit with the discomfort and let it pass, they begin to discover something remarkable. Nothing catastrophic happens. The other person survives. The world does not collapse. And the empath, having not given their energy away, has more energy for themselves. This is the quiet revolution of detachment. It does not announce itself. It does not seek validation. It simply redirects energy from external objects back to the self, and in doing so, it restores the psychic balance that was lost. Carl Jung said that the self is the organizing principle of the psyche, the center around which all else revolves. When the empath has been living in a state of imbalance, with all their energy flowing outward, the self becomes eclipsed. They lose contact with their own center. They become satellites orbiting others, never occupying their own orbit. Detachment brings them back to center. It is not a destination, but a reorientation. The empath who detaches does not arrive at a final state of being. They enter a process, one that requires ongoing attention and adjustment. They must continually monitor where their energy is going and whether it is being reciprocated. They must remain vigilant against the old patterns that will try to reassert themselves. But with practice, this vigilance becomes second nature. The empath develops an instinct for imbalance. They feel it immediately when a relationship begins to drain them, and they respond not with hope, but with adjustment. They pull back. They create space. They protect their center. Jung observed that the individuated person does not avoid relationships. They engage with others, but from a position of wholeness rather than need. The empath who is detached and returned engages with others differently. They no longer enter relationships seeking completion or validation. They enter relationships as a complete self, offering connection, but not requiring it for their sense of identity. This shift changes everything. The relationships that survive this shift are the ones that were always mutual. The ones that dissolve are the ones that were always extractive. This dissolution is painful, but it is necessary. Jung warned that clinging to relationships that no longer serve individuation is a form of psychological stagnation. The person remains stuck in old patterns, unable to move forward because they are afraid of what they will lose. But what they fail to see is what they will gain. By letting go of relationships that deplete them, they create space for relationships that nourish them. By withdrawing energy from people who cannot reciprocate, they make that energy available for people who can. The empath who has moved through detachment understands this at a cellular level. They have experienced the relief of withdrawal, the restoration that comes from redirecting energy inward. They have felt their vitality return, their clarity sharpen, their boundaries solidify. And having felt this, they cannot unknow it. They cannot return to the old way of being, the one where they gave themselves away freely and hoped it would be enough. They know now that hope without reciprocity is a form of self-abandonment. They know that care without boundaries is a form of self-harm. They know that staying in relationships that deplete them is not noble but unconscious. Carl Jung said that consciousness is the greatest gift and the greatest burden. To become conscious of these patterns, to see clearly how much energy has been wasted on what cannot change, is painful, but it is also liberating. The empath who sees clearly no longer has to waste time hoping. They can direct their energy toward what is actually present, what is actually possible, what actually nourishes them. This is not selfishness. This is psychological alignment. It is the psyche functioning as it should, distributing energy in a way that sustains life rather than drains it. The return of the empath, then, is not a return to the old self. It is an emergence of a new self, one that has integrated the lessons of detachment. This self is quieter. It does not need to prove its worth through endless care. It does not need to demonstrate its goodness by tolerating harm. It simply is, centered and whole, offering connection when it is mutual, and withdrawing when it is not. This is the mark of individuation. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of becoming who you truly are. Not who you were taught to be, not who others need you to be, but who you are when all the projections have been withdrawn and all the false hopes have dissolved. Detachment is not bitterness. It is not hardness. It is not a closing of the heart. It is a correction, a realignment of psychic energy in accordance with the laws Jung described. The empath who detaches has not lost their capacity for compassion. They have gained the capacity for discernment. They have learned that not everything deserves their energy, that not everyone deserves their hope, that some silences are more truthful than any words could be. And in learning this, they have become whole.